Hello there! Welcome to Let's Talk Research. I'm Dr. Charity Marsh, the Director of the Humanities Research Institute, or the HRI, at the University of Regina. Let's Talk Research is produced in Treaty 4 lands, and the University of Regina is situated on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6. These are the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. Let's Talk Research is a podcast focusing on the diverse, innovative, and critical research that is supported by the HRI. On today's episode, we're going to hear Dr. Sheila Petty speaking with 3 experts about African cinema, collaborative curatorship, and cultural heritage. Throughout this conversation, you're going to hear a few brief clips from the following films. Sisu and the Arab Spring, a 2016 film directed by Farid Bougadir. The 2020 film Breaking Ground, directed by Ines Girihirwe. The 1983 film Camera d'Afrique, directed by Farid Bougadir, and the 2011 film Man on Ground, directed by Akin Omotoso. With us today to help host this conversation is Dr. Sheila Petty, a professor of media studies and Sask Power Research Chair in Cultural Heritage at the University of Regina. A fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, Dr. Petty has written extensively on issues of cultural representation, identity and nation in African and African diasporic screen media, and has curated film, television, and digital media exhibitions for art galleries across Canada. She is author of Contact Zones, Memory, Origin and Discourses in Black Diasporic Cinema, and co-editor of the Directory of World Cinema Africa. Welcome, Sheila.
Today's focus is on film heritage collaborative curatorship, and I'm very pleased to bring together 3 distinguished film festival curators and researchers, all working to promote African cinema within and beyond the African continent, bringing Africa to the world via cinema. Around the globe, film festivals offer platforms for understanding film cultures and their contexts of production, distribution, and reception. Our panel of experts from 3 different continents will consider film festivals as spaces of living cultural heritage involving multiple audiences that engage with local and transnational levels of meaning. Dr. Ben Akoh is founder and president of the African Movie Festival in Manitoba. Dr. Akoh holds an interdisciplinary PhD in the intersection of culture, technology, and education, and has developed and implemented many programs with the United Nations and the World Bank in culture, telecommunications, internet technologies, and education to empower the marginalized, especially women and children in Africa and in remote Canadian Indigenous communities. Camila Esteves is a journalist, cultural producer, and researcher. She has just completed a PhD on urban narratives in contemporary African cinemas. She is the founder and curator of the Mostra de Cinemas Africanos in Sao Paulo and Salvador, Brazil, and the Cine Africa Film Club Project in Salvador, Brazil, as well as a curator of the Africa in Motion Film Festival in Scotland. She is a contributor to the website Por Dentro da África, where she writes about African cinema. Dr. Estrella Sendra is a scholar, teacher, filmmaker, journalist, and festival organizer, currently working as lecturer in global media industries at Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton in the United Kingdom, and a senior teaching fellow in film and screen studies at the University of London. She was the director of the Cambridge African Film Festival in 2014 and 2015, as well as part of the curatorial team until 2019. In 2020, she was the curator of the African Film Festival of Barcelona and has been involved in further festivals in Spain, Senegal, South Africa, and the United Kingdom as a jury member, organizer, media officer, curator, or panelist. Today, we're going to broach three broad topics, and we're going to have a dialogue between our three experts on these various topics. The first topic deals with film heritage and the role of collaboration in festivals and the experience of our experts with African cinemas. And so perhaps what we will do is begin with each of you describing your experiences curating African cinemas. What does film heritage mean in this context? And what is the role of collaboration in your respective festivals? And I think we will start with Estrella.
What is really interesting is the way in which in the UK, African film festivals have been trying to collaborate in order to promote African cinemas that are often very much marginalized despite the amount of spaces that are available. This has started in a very informal way. And the issue of heritage is crucial here because I think that on the one hand, we are bringing stories that are celebrating heritage, that are contesting it, that are bringing dimensions of this spaces and traces of history and her stories and their stories that are not often approached in a very intersectional or a critical way when these films are taken out of the context of this heritage. So I think that as curators, what we have tried to do really is to make sure that we were offering enough context in order to make sure that this heritage was in dialogue with the local audiences here as well in the UK, because many of them are of African heritage, many of them have had experiences of international mobilization and so on.
When in space, one realizes while gazing on the planet Earth that we have mistakenly constructed these narrow borders of geography in order to mimic the narrow borders of our minds. However, when looking upon the planet Earth from space, the truth that this is our collective home becomes blatantly obvious. I only hope that we realize that the labels them and us are one and the same.
When doing this, we encounter many challenges. What are the stories that often appear? To what extent are we able to access this? And we find ourselves as sort of like guerrilla researchers looking and digging for these stories in different kinds of spaces where there is already a commitment to celebrate and preserve this heritage, sometimes again involving different kinds of temporalities from the very past to the present. When doing this, we realized that we were not alone. We were bringing specificities to different kinds of locations. But it was also very useful to ensure that the circuit and journey of this heritage was going to go beyond our specific locations, say, for example, the case of Cambridge. So what we did was, in the UK, find a way of collaborating together to make this journey longer. And this is how TANO started as a network. TANO is the Swahili word for 5. And this is a network that was founded in February 2013 at the renowned festival FESPACO, where African Motion, Africa Eye, and the Cambridge African Film Festival and Film Africa signed the Ouagadougou Declaration. What is it that we wanted to do? Well, we wanted to work together. TANO would be the umbrella name for the UK 5 African film festivals. Afterwards, maybe there are some other initiatives that have been showcasing the cinemas, but it's the 5 of us that have been existing for a while right now, Cambridge being the longest running actually, but very, very small. And again, this idea of what is small and big is very subjective because even if it's small in terms of size, it can have a large impact. But we realized that by being together, we were all going to commit towards the same goals, sharing films and touring African film directors that we could share through sharing resources, through offering a longer tour. We could also apply for funding applications, for example, the BFI National Lottery Fund. This was going to enrich our film festivals, but at the same time was going to allow us to do seasons seasons where this idea of heritage could be celebrated in wider spaces. We did, for example, South Africa 20 focus in celebration or questioning the 20th anniversary of democracy in South Africa, or we did as well a focus on love. This thematic curation of film festivals allows us to move beyond the label of African cinema and the expectations of what is considered as African over here. So having a love focus, for example, allows us not only to bring contemporary titles, but also titles from the past. There was a timely book published by one of the organizers of the film festivals in the UK, Liselle Bischoff, that was called African Lost Classics. And again, another season planned in relation to this, with African Motion leading this. So at the end of the day, what we were doing was trying to promote the screening of African cinema films in all platforms and by all means possible. I would like later maybe to talk a little bit more about how this collaboration materialized in times of COVID, for example, where many of us could have disappeared. But I want to end this first intervention with some reflection about why this really matters. First of all, we were contesting, and we are contesting, the narrative of exclusion that there is about, of African cinema. This idea of a narrative of exclusion that African cinemas have to survive from is a term that I really like from my colleague Lindiwe Dovey here at SOAR, a professor in film, but also the co-founding director of the Cambridge African Film Festival and of Film Africa, and also part of the Steering Africa committee at the moment with myself that we have recently joined. As she notes, African films have not been very frequently screened in competition or celebrated in Cannes, and she speaks widely about this in her book, Curating Africa in the Age of Film Festivals. But why does this matter as well? Well, second of all, we manage by being together and collaborate in this idea of celebrating African film heritage, we managed to establish a small yet very impactful festival circuit in the UK. We also managed to contribute to the mainstreaming of African cinema, to accessing broader audiences, but also to accessing more funding sources, and to, at the end of the day, creatively respond to the fragility in creative industries.
Well, thank you, Estrella. That's an excellent overview of the great work that's being done by some of the more established festivals in Europe and the other parts of the world. But we have also with us Ben and Camila, who are founders of two relatively new film festivals focusing on Africa in two different continents. And so now it would be wonderful to have their perspectives on this issue, starting with Camila.
I can relate to many things that Estrella just said. Maybe I want to highlight on the situation in Brazil when we are speaking about African cinema in this country. And why is that? I have a professor, he was a dear friend, Mohamed Bamba. He was conducting a research about how the Brazilian audiences receive the African cinema in this country. And why is that? Being an Afro diaspora, Black people here, they have the African cinema as this place of memory. It's like the way they are going to relate to the African ancestry and all of that. So when my festival, the Mostra de Cinemas Africanos, when we started the festival here in Brazil, it was a big challenge because we had to deal with these expectations of what is the African cinema we were talking about. Are we talking about Black cinema? Are we talking about only films directed by African people in the African continent? What exactly are we talking about? Because before, and I say that like very, very proud of the work that we are doing. I think we were the first festival here in Brazil that was addressing the issue of what is African cinema apart from the Black film, the approach of Black film. So this is something interesting here, and it all started with this research conducted by Professor Bamba because we were trying to understand, and he was trying to understand, and I was continuing with this. How can we, build a film festival here in Brazil to actually deal with the expectations of black people around the idea of black cinema in one side, and then on the other side, we wanted to consider the African cinema as cinema. We wanted to highlight these films here in Brazil in the context of other film festivals, other international film festivals, because as Estrella was mentioning, we know that historically these films are not, they are invisible, and it's not different here in Brazil. We have loads of international film festivals, and African cinema is always a small part of it and not always in competition. So what we are trying to do here in Brazil now is dealing with the challenge of, it's a challenge because there's a tension between people who deal with African cinema and people who deal with Black cinema. I think this is very strong here in Brazil. I wonder how it is in the UK or in Canada, for example, because what I've been feeling in the past maybe 2 years is that the European African film festivals are also interested in Black films from Brazil. So there is this relation that people are doing, and I am curious about that as a curator, because that's exactly what I don't want to do here in Brazil, because that's what everyone does. And it's a challenge for me as a curator to focus on African cinema, because they have different contexts, they have different subjects, they have different meanings in a way, and different aesthetics. So it's been a challenge for me. I don't know. I think I'm speaking too much. For now, I can go on in this subject, because I think the role of the curator in a space like Brazil, when we are dealing with African cinema, is tricky sometimes. And I've been dealing with that for the past 3-4 years now. So yeah, I would love to talk more about that later. Thank you.
I think this is a good part for me to come in and maybe just add some comments to some of the good stuff that Estrella and Camila had talked about. But let me just shift a little bit and maybe just think about heritage or film heritage and contextualize that a little bit. Oftentimes we think about film heritage as just the preservation and the restoration, or maybe even the archiving of films, right? And often we think about it just from the media perspective. How can we protect the media? How can we preserve it and restore it and make sure we extend its life? But oftentimes we don't think about the spirit of the media, the culture within the media, or the context of the media, or the message within the media, for that matter. When we think about preservation, the media comes into context often automatically, but the message behind the media is really key and important. And I think we should be driving our attention to that. How do we, and I say this because we live in a Western society, our ability to be able to preserve culture within this context is important. And that's what film helps us to do in a way. Film takes us back, helps us to recreate the past. Film takes us back, help us to ground our culture, our tradition. Film brings us forward into the context of our current society and helps us to understand where we are today and how these different cultures and contexts can merge, combine, or even be recognized. The differences between the contexts and cultures can be understood better in order that we can understand ourselves better. I think that's one of the challenges that I have running the African Movie Festival here in Manitoba, right in the center of Canada. We are a young film festival. We're 5 years in. This year we'll be running our 5th edition. But it's been very challenging. It's been challenging from the perspective that we are trying to, break through what would seem to be a Western cultural dominant context, and having to do that using traditional films, specifically from Africa, it's been a challenge. But there has been some success in the process. And I would recognize all of the good points that Estrella and Camila had mentioned about contesting the narrative of exclusion, right? We have, through film, been able to contest those narratives. We're trying to suggest through films and the stories that happen through films that we can create a space for dialogue and a space for cultural and mutual understanding. Now, we live in a context in Canada where we define it as a cultural mosaic. And a mosaic represents an equi-sized piece that is put together. But we don't have that in our cultural context in Canada, in the broad context of Canada. Some pieces are larger than other pieces. And why we see film as an important part of at least beginning to break through those narratives and to cause those questions to become a lot more mainstream questions, and dialogue becomes really important.
ما عندي وين نمشي وما نعرف حد في تونس. خدمت بعد مع واحد يركب البارابولات.
بيصيرش ندبر لك حاجة.
So what do we do in our film festival, the African Movie Festival in Manitoba? Each edition, we actually showcase and bring together a number of practitioners, people that are in the space of film, to have them share the issues that they face within a specific context or within a specific area of importance, such as the role of gender in film. How would a woman director, for instance, that is Black or African in the Canadian context be able to break through the space? What are some of the challenges that she faces? How does she present her film in the larger Canadian context that is predominantly white or of a different culture? How does she get recognition? We think about the Black body generally in some of the conversations that we have. How is the Black body represented in film? What is the message that is perpetrated through the screens from, showcasing those Black bodies? How can we change those narratives? So that context of that narrative of exclusion is quite key, and how we break through those narratives are really, really important. I do like the comment that Camila made about African cinema as a place of memory. I think it's quite important. When I see myself in the Canadian context, I often say I come from the Mother Earth, the motherland, and the motherland to me represents the emergence of civilization, the emergence of humanity. And I often would say, you know what, if you could look back to where we all come from, you might be able to see some important messages from where we come from that helps us to coexist in our cultural context, the context we call Canada today. And that would only happen when we can see through the eyes of others, when we can identify, how they portray their culture and their context.
Your crown is in your head. Just keep walking straight. No need to bend the knee. Stay in line with thee. Freedom is our key.
So film plays a significant role in this portrayal of culture or context, and also in our acceptance of those cultural contexts. So for now, let me just stop there. But I think the understanding of film as a heritage and this idea around preservation, restoration, and archiving of films goes beyond the media. I think we want to look at it beyond that, to look at the preservation of cultures, cultural heritage, and the existence of people.
There is one thing that I maybe want to clarify. Here in Brazil, we have loads of Black film festivals. We have like one in each city. When I was listening to you, I was thinking about these festivals here because they are actually doing the same thing as what you're doing there. And thinking about the Black body and this part of the production that we don't really talk about, the difficulties and, the institutional problems that Black people face when they want to make their movies, especially here in these countries. Yeah, and they are actually amazing spaces for dialogue and for articulating to try to change the narrative and all that. So yeah, the thing is, those were the festivals that were screening African films in here. When we started to think about the festival, and I should add that the festival was founded by Beatriz Leal Riesco. She's a Spanish. She's an amazing researcher and specialist in Africa. And me, we were doing this together. And when we thought about it, we were like, okay, we need to focus on African film for a moment. Let's just understand what, and actually the contemporary African film, African cinema, because we wanted to understand what was going on, the styles and the aesthetics and what they were thinking about and talking about. The thing is, the issue is when we started to do this here in Brazil, I believe people were expecting us to be another Black film festival. So we are not doing this, and I know one thing is within the other, but we have this different focus on trying to understand the actually trying to trigger this idea of African cinema that people have here in Brazil. So that's why we are trying to get this focus on African cinema as cinema. And that's why we don't go to, a specific theme or anything like that. We just want to, bring African films that people are not used to watch here in Brazil. So this is our main goal as well, because we know those films are never coming to Brazil again, most of them.
I just wanted to add a couple of aspects from the experience here in the UK. First of all, I really agree with that comment that you made, Ben, of heritage not being something, first of all, of the past and of the media. I think that we often resignify this when we are in the context of a moving festival. We are talking about a moving image at the end of the day, and heritage moves along these festivals and along the time. And what I find really interesting is to see as well how we are having these discussions even about what is to be considered African film or African film heritage, and how this is very much shaped by the context, and context that may be geographical, that may be ideological, that may be as well historic or has to do with temporalities. But there is also something really interesting to me about this. And as we are also trying to find a way of making these festivals work, and it's the way in which the curation and understanding of African cinema changes over time in our own festivals, but also more in mainstream spaces, maybe thanks to the work that we have had. And I want to now mention the collaborative network or program that we created in times of COVID in the TANO network. We actually entitled this We Are TANO, and it was a wink or a way of responding or, being sympathetic with that We Are One festival that was created online by some of the A-list film festivals. And I was thinking of that tension, Anna Camila, that you were mentioning about, what is African cinema? How is this to be considered different from Black cinema and so on? And I remember that what we did in times of COVID, when we were thinking that many of our festivals, such as the Cambridge African Film Festival or the What Africa Film Festival in Wales, were not going to be able to really survive because they were too small and couldn't think of streaming platforms and so on, we did this We Are TANO season. And why do I call it season? Because, it could even be called a retrospective, which is again like another way of thinking of, first of all, film heritage, but also the heritage of our film festivals as containers of this heritage over time. And this goes back to this question of how do we archive everything that goes on in this period, and how maybe even during the pandemic, we have adopted practices of preserving this heritage beyond the festival dates. We created this We Are TANO season or program from the 1st to the 21st of October 2020. As you can see, this coincides with the Black History Month in October. And this is very much how we marketed this. We marketed it as an online journey of discovery during the Black History Month. And what we did collaboratively is that we curated our 10 favorite titles from the past decade. So one representing each sort of country, like 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017. And it was we were also prioritizing films that had not been mainstreamed or like distributed them on Netflix or anything like that. And we were actually priding ourselves for having managed to contribute to having some forms of distribution of the cinemas beyond our festivals, for example, via DVDs and so on. So this was all very much shaped by this collaboration, and it was a great opportunity not just to have something to offer, but to reflect about the impact of our festivals and the kind of stories that we were bringing every year to different UK-based African, not just African audiences, but UK-based audiences.
While Estrella was talking, I was thinking about the context, the issue of context that Ben was talking about before. I'm sorry, the context and the collaboration. You know, because of I think the context is a very important thing when we are talking about our festival here, because of all the things that I just said. I think that context was the very problem that we had when it comes to collaborations in Brazil, even before the pandemic. So I just wanted to tell you, actually, that when the pandemic started, it was really easier for me. It was easier for me to be in touch with African film festivals in the continent, in Africa. And it's been a very pleasant experience for me to, invite African curators to work with me or to just, curate, and then we are going to showcase, because I thought maybe one of the problems were the fact that we are not inviting African people enough. We were not involving African people enough, because I think the African people, the African directors, the African creators were the best people to actually talk about their work, to help me or to help the festival to address these differences and, all these things that we wanted to address regarding Black film and all that. So it was really good for me. I've been doing this maybe for the last 3 years now, inviting African curators to be with us, to help program and all that, and inviting them to talk about film critique as well. Because I think it's something that have been helping us in the process of curatorship, because of course we are in, West countries in the West. And I think about that all the time when I'm curating. I'm thinking about what is the idea of African cinema and how am I treating all these films, all this collection of films that I am building. What am I doing, for the future? And we are talking about film heritage and all this thing that Ben was mentioning about not being only an archive thing, but I think all the time, what am I building for the future, because I document everything I do, because we are always documenting everything we do. So what exactly am I doing as a curator? Because I think it's a place of power as well, the curatorship, even in Brazil, because I know speaking about Brazil is not the same as speaking about, England. So even here, I think it's a place of power as well. So I think about that all the time. What exactly, as a curator, we are building for the future? The discourses, what we are saying about African film as a curator, considering our different contexts and our different audiences and our different collaborations between festivals in the West or in Africa.
This conversation will be continued in episode 2 of Let's Talk Research. Let's Talk Research is produced by me, Dr. Charity Marsh, and I'm supported in this project by my tech-savvy and creative research assistant, Maria Azam, and the fantastic folks at Roman Empire Studios. You can find Let's Talk Research on the HRI website or on your favorite podcasting platform. Thanks for listening.